Hello and thank you for joining us today. My name is Manny Castro. I'm the Technical Services Specialist here at Siegel Scientific. And today we're excited to offer a presentation and some training on the integration platform of BarTender 2016. So integration allows you to automate your printing process. Your system or your application can easily call BarTender to print or perform other actions in the background, all based on how you set up your integration. Today we'll set up some examples and go through the process of creating a couple integrations. Before we dive into the UI, I did want to go ahead and explain how integration works, or at least the principle, in BarTender 2016, and we'll do that with a few slides. In BarTender 2016, there are two components you will use when creating an integration and sending it into production. In the integration builder, you will build and test your integrations. Once fully tested, you will deploy and administer those integrations, and that's going to be in the administration console. Here, all your integrations will be visible, and you can be running multiple integrations as well, all at once, and you can independently manipulate those. Here we see a simple workflow or diagram, if you will, of what's actually happening from beginning to end. On the left, we see a trigger event. So this is what is actually triggering your integration. The integration is just waiting for that to happen. So such as a file dropping or a web service request to come in. From there, the integration service then executes any actions it was set up to do. These include writing to a database, moving or deleting a file, or passing any print jobs to the print schedule service. So now the print schedule service, it deserves a little bit of special attention as well. What that does is it assigns print jobs to your BarTender print engines, right? But it does a little bit more than that. It actually is aware of what's going on and what kind of print jobs are coming in, and it guarantees the print order of your labels. So it does that by intelligently assigning the jobs to the correct print engine. Even if you are printing serial numbers or multiple serial numbers or multiple records from your database, that service makes sure that that is taken care of. So that's the little bit of the backgrounds of the inner workings. So we're ready to build a new integration or test one, right? The first step is to open the integration builder. This is a very powerful tool that will house all your designing and testing of the integrations that you build. You will begin by selecting the integration method that you require or that you need. This is what's going to trigger your integration to occur. You have all the options you see available, but today we're going to create some simple examples of a file integration, a database integration, and a web service integration. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So once you selected a method, let's say we're doing a file integration, then you're able to move on to the next step of configuring your integration. At this point, you will want to set all the details such as what directory are we going to monitor. Also, all the actions. So when this integration is triggered, when we drop a folder or a file into that directory, what all should occur. So should we print the label? Should we send an email? Should we write to a database? So those are all examples of actions that can be created and configured when you're designing your integration. And here we see the user interface. On the left, under integrations, you will see all the integrations that we've added, so you can have multiples of them there. For example, you can have a file integration and a web integration in that same file, in that same .btin file. Under the file integration section, you will see the options for the integration in question and the actions. So the integration properties will change based on what kind of integration you're creating. So right now we have it selected to file, so that's why we see folder to scan. If we had it set to, let's say, a database integration where we're monitoring a database somewhere, we would see the settings for that database. So what database are we connected to? What table in that database, and all those other details, and how we're going to respond to triggers. And at any point when you're building your integration, what you can do is on the bottom left-hand corner, you can test it. Clicking on that test tab in the bottom left-hand corner brings up a different tab. So what that does is it allows you to view like the different logs and all the different details of that integration in question. So let's say we click that test tab, and there we see all our logs, our errors, and any other information of that particular integration. Uh, Once that is complete, we have the term of deploying an integration. So here's an explanation as to what that means. Hitting the test tab, we emulate the production environment. So all the services are running in the background, and it's going to work like this in theory, just as it will in production. But this is not technically a live integration yet, however. Once we are ready to put in an integration into production, we deploy it. We can deploy it to the same machine, to your production server, for example, or to multiple machines if needed. We can also deploy on a schedule. So let's say we deploy an integration. From there, where does it go, right? Where do we click next? Well, it goes into the administration console. And that's not technically the administration console of this machine, but it is the administration console of whatever machine you deploy it to. So talking about that, the administration console is used for not just integration. It has a lot of other administrative tasks that you can do in there, all in relation to your BarTender suite. So that's any permissions, the system database, configuring that system database, service monitoring as well. But once deployed, we can also monitor those integrations that we keep talking about there. So here we see that we have multiple integrations running. So each one of these was deployed at one point in its own .btin file that we have saved somewhere that we made a copy into the administration console, or we made a copy and we sent it, we deployed it. And from here, you can also drill into each integration. So we see the file integration at the top. By clicking on that blue icon there, we're able to drill into there and see what's going on with that integration. So let's say we only have one that's giving us trouble or giving us problems. We don't necessarily have to click and dig through the logs of every single integration. We will only see the detailed logs of that one that the one that's in question. So at this point, we kind of have a rough concept and understanding of the integration process in BarTender, kind of what is it on the surface. So let's go ahead and build a couple integrations. I'll walk you through the process of building these few integrations, and I'll explain my steps as we're going through them. You'll see a file integration, a database integration, and a web service integration. And from that, we have a few little files set up like our BarTender labels, but otherwise we don't have much else set up. So we're really going to go from just the idea of an integration to it being fully deployed in our administration console. And with that, of course, a big part of an integration is, you'll see some hiccups every once in a while. So if we do run into any hiccups today, you'll see how I approach them and how I resolve them if we do run into them. So let's go ahead and get started. We begin with the integration builder, and this is the basic UI that you get when you first open it up. So you just click on it from your start menu. This is what we see. On the left, you see any sample ones that we may have created earlier. But today, we're just going to go ahead and create a new integration. So here we see all the different options. So like this is just the first step like we discussed. So how are we going to trigger our integration to occur? So whatever action we need, so to send an email, to write to file, or to print out our label format, what's going to trigger that event? So we're going to begin with our file integration. So here, because we selected file, and we have file detection selected on the left, we see all the properties for that type of integration that we selected. Below that, we see any actions that we created. So by default, we just have a print action. And up here on the top left-hand corner, we see the integrations box. So if we wanted to add a second file integration or a second request there, web request integration, we can. So a little bit on actions there. We'll cover a few of them, or quite a few of them actually, in today's session. But simply, there's just a lot of different actions available in BarTender 2016 when you come to integrating. So we have all these options available, actions, excuse me, available that really just give you a lot of flexibility. So if you need a certain action done as part of your integration, it's really worth a shot to just look through here at some point if you're not 100% sure that it's possible, because of all the flexibility that we have, it totally might be. So what we're going to do there is let's just go ahead and design a simple integration. We're going to be scanning a file directory. And that's going to be that file that we see on my desktop. So let's go ahead and browse to it and set that as the scan directory. Now, for this particular scenario that I have set up, we are scanning for a CSV file. So at this point, we're telling it we're going to scan that desktop directory, and that may as well be a network directory, or if we have any cloud-based, like my Dropbox account or Librarian, we can scan those directories as well. So just for this scenario, though, we've selected that folder, but all of them are available. So we're scanning for a CSV file. Our scan method is set to immediate, and then we want the files to be renamed to text. Now we can set them to be deleted or to be moved, but for this scenario, we have selected text. So at this point, whenever I dropped a CSV file into that scan directory, this print action is going to be executed. So now, unfortunately, I don't have anything there yet, so nothing will print. But we could make it as simple as selecting a BarTender document, and at that point, I mean, we could already drop a trigger file if we deployed this and be dropping trigger files. But we want a little bit more flexibility than that, right? We want to be able to populate our labels. So now, for those familiar with Commander script, you're still able to utilize that same feature. The only thing is we now reference it print command script. So if you already have that in place and you need to bring that feature and include it with other things in BarTender 2016, or you're moving up, you're still able to use that. But we have a bit of a new or different way to print dynamic labels in BarTender 2016, and that is using variables. So you'll notice that on the left there, we see the option for the variables, and we're able to look at all the predefined integration variables that we have available. Okay, so what these are is these are essentially placeholders, if you will, that you're able to use throughout your integration. So the easy way to think about that is, for example, let's say I had a variable that was the printer name, and we will do that actually. Just by using that syntax there, so percent printer name percent, we're able to populate whatever value is in that variable, whatever value that we've stored in that variable, and define the printer. So that could be a static variable, or if it's set up that way, or it could be dynamic. So let's say the trigger file should be defining what printer we're going to use. We're now able to use that and do that using the variables. And wherever you see that blue X throughout the integration process, that means that you're able to open up the insert variable dialog, and you're able to insert a variable of some sort into that dialog. So keep an eye out for that X, because if you do see that anywhere, that means that you're able to utilize that option. So let's take a step back and let's look at a sample database here. So here we see that we have just a CSV or a tab delimiter, or a CSV type file, and we have headers across the top that are printer name, BarTender document to print, my text object, other text object, etc. And then we have some values below that. And this is just the sample database. But what if we want to use a format or a database in this format and use it to populate all those variables, and not just that, but also the data on our label? Well, now we can. So there's no special need like such as command or script or special proprietary format or syntaxes. We can just use that. So let's look at the label format quickly so you can see how simple it actually is. And this is what our label format looks like. And you'll notice that there's nothing special about it. There's no database connection set up like we've seen in the past. There's no dummy database that you need to do here. The only thing that I've done to this particular label format is I've gone around and I've given the data sources names. So I've named like this text object here, my text object. And we'll see that around we have a few different ones, so such as first name, and you can see a full list of them on the left-hand corner over there. So, and that's it really. At that point, we can really close that label format. And you see what that does is, it's not always the scenario that the floor operator designing these label formats maybe, or the guy in marketing is not the same person, or for example, like the IT guy or the engineer that's going to be configuring and setting up this integration. So what that does, it also separates those two tasks if that needs to be done. You can make it so that a person designs the label format that has not much technical knowledge. They just know that it needs to look nice, the coloring, the spacing, etc. And then the engineer or your IT guy can come in and configure that integration for you from there. So we've seen that label format. We've seen that sample database file. So let's go ahead and try to set that up. Now, a few new terms to add to all this newness. We're going to go in and create a new database action. And it's going to be transform text to record set. And what that does is it's going to take, in our scenario, it's going to take the text from our trigger file that we're dropping. It's going to transform it to a record set. So put it into like a nice, neat table, almost a database, if you will. And from there, we're going to create a second action where we execute for each database record. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We create the new transform, and we can drag and drop these up and down as you can see there. And we do want those to be in order of execution for this, for how we're setting this up. So now we can make that dummy database connection at this level. So at this point, let's go ahead and try to connect to that sample DB file that we see on our desktop. So we see the data there, and if we hit preview, so we see the printer name, the BarTender document to print. So now remember though, these are just variables. It's almost like placeholders. This is what actually prints out the data, the printers, the document. It could be completely different because we're using that variable option. So, and then that just gives you a really, the ability to have a really dynamic print experience because any given trigger file could have any given data and any given label. So let's continue on. So we see our preview, that looks good. So then we hit finish, and there's our sample database. And what we want to do there, that next is make sure that we set it to variable. So now what we're doing here is the first step at the top is the text database connection configuration. We've connected to that sample database. So this is saying, okay, here are the headers available. This is what you can use throughout your integration. And the next one down, what we're doing there is we're assigning the value, so the value of the trigger file coming in to event data. And event data is also a variable that we can use throughout. And you'll see how we use that as we continue on. So we've done that. We've connected to our sample database. At this point, we've just brought that in. We're able to next use or create the next action, which is for each database record. So now here, you'll notice the thing to pay attention to is the event data. So the source for this uh, for each record database execution action that we just created, the source of that data is your event data. So, and what that is in this integration platform is that trigger file data that's coming in. That's the actual data that's going to be used to execute for each record. So we're kind of just doing this as we bring in the database, or we bring in the trigger file data, we convert it to a nice format that we can see it, and then we execute for each record. Okay, and then for the print document, we want to take note and make sure that we drag it down below for each database record. We'll notice that we have the little arrow that appears that allows us to collapse that action. And what that is, this is like a parent and child action. So for each database record, because has the possibility to have, let's say you have 3 records, or let's say you have 100 records, it has the possibility to be executed more than once per integration cycle, right? So what that does is, by dragging and dropping on the inside of the action from print document to each database record, it allows you to create that child action that then executes per each database record. So now we've connected to that database. We've have it in a format that we can use now. So let's go ahead and try to use some of those variables that we discussed. So instead of browsing, and well, I do want to do one thing. Because we have all those named data sources, I want to import the document settings. And what that's going to do, it's going to bring in what printer I'm using for this document, the number of copies I left it on. If I have any named data sources, and that's the big one, if I have any named data sources on that document, it's going to show it to me here. And I'm going to use that and link it to parts of my integration. So that's why I hit that import document settings button. So from there, let's go ahead and erase that printer. Let's say we're going to have a dynamic printer. Let's hit that blue X and go to Action and look for printer name. So if we look there now, even though this file is associated with that zebra printer that we just looked at, we're now using that variable. So that printer name, printer name %, is just nothing more than a field on our trigger file that's coming in. So let's continue scrolling down, and then we'll see the named data sources. So by default, we could just use static data. So I could just insert whatever data I need here, or if I need to, I can erase this and I can start linking it to all the appropriate fields. So now you'll notice as well, the named data source in my label format, where you see my barcode, it's not the same as my barcode object. So those names don't have to be the same. They could be completely different. One could be 123 and the other one could be XYZ. It's just as long as you know which data source is linked to which field on that trigger file coming in, that's really all that matters. So let's go throughout and let's just erase some of these and link them up to some of our data sources. And then something else to note is you don't have to use static data or a data source, or one variable or nothing. You can use multiple variables. You can use some static data as well. So let's say we want company here, and then after that, so that's going to be static, and then after that we need the company name of whatever company name is coming in on that trigger file. We can do that as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be all or nothing. So let's continue on, and we're just going to select the first name there, select the last name, and my text object 3, or my text object, there we go. Okay, so we didn't necessarily have to populate all of them, but we did for this scenario, and we even added a little bit of change to the company name. So now before we go to test, because we're feeling like we're pretty close to completion, kind of ready to get ready to start testing this integration, right? A big part of the integration process is you have these small details that just they kind of hang you up. So you have the wrong credentials, so you don't have permissions or access to a directory somewhere, or you have the wrong directory, right? So as far as credentials go, though, let's cover that for a second. You don't have to go digging into the services panel to set what credentials are going to run your particular integration. What you can do is you can click on the integration option on the left that you see I selected there, and you can specify your user credentials here. So now what that does is it takes whatever user credentials that we type in here and it applies it to all the actions below it. Okay, so now if we have only a particular action that needs a those credentials, so let's see if we can send an email. So let's say we also added the option to send an email. We can actually specify that this action alone have credentials that differ from the rest of the integration above it. So that really gives you the ability, so you don't necessarily have to set your service to run on one account that may be the domain account that you don't want to use. If you have a particular account that you think is going to work just for your integration or just for this particular integration, so just for the shipping department, let's say, then you're able to do that. You don't have to do the all or nothing. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you do need any kind of security or credentials or authentication into any resources that's part of your integration, so files, folders, printers, anything like that, this is where you'll want to make sure that you set that up. So let's go ahead and test our integration, and let's see if we can get something to print out. And if we made any mistakes along the way, let's see if we can figure out what went wrong. So I'm just gonna simulate a file dropping. We see that we have some error message. We have some other messages there that we see that the label actually printed. So for this one, let me minimize the PDFs for a second. For this one, we sent 2 copies to a PDF printer, and then 1 copy to, well, not 1 copy, but 2 labels, 2 instances of that label to PDF printers, and 1 to this Zebra printer here that we see on screen. So we do have some error messages as far as the printer mismatch, but then we also see here the data on our label. So as you can see, it populated everything accordingly. So now, if we go back and we look at these logs, we can see that while we did have some errors, it mostly printed out okay. We just had those warning errors that, hey, this is a different kind of printer, and that may happen as you're printing. But something we can do as well here is if we do stop and start the integration, yes, this output box will clear out because we're just in the testing phase. But if for some reason we need to send this integration again, we can right click on it and hit playback integration event. So we don't necessarily have to redrop that trigger file and be renaming it and renaming it. If we know that the data in that trigger file is good and the settings that occur or the issues that occurred are actually as part of your integration setup or settings, it's not part of the trigger file, then you're able to just play back the event. Or if you just simply need to reprint that label. And we'll see how, once we get this into live integration, how that plays a role and how that's useful. So at this point, we kind of have made our integration there. To recap on just the file integration, we created a new integration. We selected the file type. We set the folder to scan to the scan folder on our desktop. The location is computer or network, but we're free to use Librarian or Dropbox if available. We're scanning for CSV files, and we are renaming them to text files after we have processed them. We are running the user count as just the standard system account, but if we did need to specify any kind of user settings, or excuse me, user credentials, this is where we would do that. From there, we created a few actions. So the first one that or the one at the top of the list there is transform text to record set. What we did there and what that does is it brings in the data from the trigger file and it puts it into a database format. So it makes it nice for us to parse out and assign the variables that we need. From there, we chose to execute for each database record. So even if we have multiple multiple records, 3, 4, 5, 100, we're going to execute for each one. And then after that, because we have that set to event data, that's all the trigger file data that's coming in, our label format is going to print. We used that static file path name. Well, we could use, we could have used as well a dynamic, a variable, a variable, which is the BTW to print. For the printer, we also set it to a variable that's all coming from our event data. And then we linked up each data source in that document to each named data source to a variable that we have defined in our trigger file. So our integration is complete. We saw that it printed, and let's go ahead and let's double, because I did make one little change there to the directory, let's double check and make sure that it still prints before we deploy it. Okay, and our label formats still are printing. Okay, so there we have the data, varying data coming in, and that all looks great. So let's go ahead and stop our test. And at this point, let's save this integration out. And then open on my other screen, but we can also save the integrations to keep them safe, and so we can use all of Librarian's built-in functionality as well for our integration files. And these integration files are BTIN files. So now we're going to save this one in Librarian, and if we ever need to edit it, this is the file that we're going to go look for, or this is the file that we're going to go and open to make whatever changes we need. And there, we're just giving it kind of a descriptive name so that we know what our integration is doing. And then we're going to save it out. And now at this point, we could just close out Integration Builder and we would get no error message, but there's nothing live in production. There's nothing in the administration console, and we can even open that up at this point, and we can see that we have no integrations to be deployed. So we have a couple options. We can browse, we can browse to the integration via this icon here and add it. So we can deploy the integration directly from the administration console. Or we can also, as long as our integration has been saved, we can deploy it from the integration builder here. So here we see where that file is going to be coming from. So where are we taking a copy of? And it wants a name. And let's give it a description. Okay, so then we kind of know exactly what we're intending with this integration. We can add multiple computers. So this is actually here just my work machine, which is M Castro LT. So if we needed to, we could add multiple IP addresses here and we can deploy it to multiple machines. Now, also, what if my machine was not the target machine? After all, I mean, maybe this is a laptop or just some desktop computer. It's like, this probably shouldn't be running the integration, right? Well, you can deploy it, and this is where you would set that up to different machines or to different production servers. And what's occurring there is the two integration services are talking to each other across the network, and we send a copy of this integration file over to that other production server so that they can put it into their administration console, and it automatically pops up there based on your settings. So also, let's say this is an integration that we tested. It's working great, but it's not ready for production. We need to wait until Monday morning. Well, this is where we'll be able to set that up. So if we need to set any kind of schedule, this is where that would be done. So let's hit OK. And it's going to go ahead and deploy that integration for us. Okay, and there we see our file integration. And one thing that I missed as well is when you're designing your integration, and you notice that I had to start it, you want it, well, depending on the behavior that you want, you can deploy your integration and you can set it, or the default is set to manually start. So you have to go in there and start it. If you want to deploy your integration and it automatically start right off the bat, then the setting that you want to look for there is under integration and then start integration, and you want to set that to automatic. Okay, so our integration is running, it's live. Let's go ahead and see if it actually works. And I just dropped a trigger file and we see it running there. So our trigger files are still printing out correctly. Let's go ahead and drill into this particular integration, and then here we see all the different error messages and warning messages and the successfully printed messages. And you can get even more detail by just double clicking on them. So double clicking on them or any one of these messages here allows you to see the details of it, and you see all the different variables and anything that was used as part of that. So it really helps you in troubleshooting as well. So if we want to replay this, or we need to reprint those labels, the printer got jammed, they never got them, let's send it again. You don't have to go dig through that scan directory and try to drop an identical one. You just simply play back that particular integration, and then that's enough to go ahead and re-execute it. If we look at our message history here on the left, we see that each integration that we have has its own section for its error messages. So if we had multiple integrations, and we will in just a second, we'll see multiples of them here. So let's go ahead and before we move into the database integration, let's go ahead and cover these couple questions, Jasper, whenever you're ready there, and we'll go ahead and move on after that.
Okay. Looks like the first question we got here is, does the integration builder need to be installed on the machine where the integration will be deployed?
Yes, it actually does need to be installed. If you remove the integration builder component, it actually removes the whole integration section from the administration console. So even though you're not going to be using the builder aspect of it, you still want to make sure that you install it on the production server, even if you aren't going to be building the integrations themselves there.
Okay. Next question we got here. How does the BTIN file sent to the server as deployment, and what protocol or ports are used?
Right, so for that, the integration service on each machine talk to each other, and that's actually going to be via port 5150. So you do want to make sure that that's open on your network, and via that port, the integration is sent from your receiving machine to the destination machine. All right, thanks, Jasper. So let's go ahead and continue on. The next type of integration that we're going to see an example of is the database integration. So for that, we can minimize the administration console, and we can reopen the integration builder. Okay, and just like we did before, we're going to select to create a new integration. We're going to see all the available options there, but in this scenario, or this time, we're going to select the database integration. So now what this does is pretty much we're going to go through the database connection setup, and we're going to tell Integration Builder, hey, this is my database, scan it for a certain value or a certain date or after a certain date, and that's when you should print. And then we'll look at the three options that we have available there. But what really is easy about this is it's not always um, plausible or easy for an ERP system or another piece of software to create a trigger file in a certain format or to be dropping trigger files after each transaction. However, a lot of these applications have a database that they run off of or where they store all the data. And it's very easy for these systems to manipulate their database. So they can very easily create a table and allow us to just monitor that table and print. And we can even, because of all the variables that we just spoke about, we can use variables and the data within the database that we're monitoring and actually populate our label format. So now we have a simple example here set up, but let's go ahead and connect to a SQL database. We're going to put in the username, and just like any if you have any like security enabled on your SQL database, and in most scenarios you probably are going to want to either double check or make sure, I mean, you're able to test it, but usually there is something of security enabled. For this scenario, we're just going to go ahead and just use Windows authentication. This is just the local SQL instance on my machine here, and I have a sample database for you guys. So let's continue on. And at this point, we can either set a custom statement. So if we have our own custom SQL statement and we're going to execute that SQL statement to get the data in the format that we need, then we're able to do that. Otherwise, we're just able to use the built-in wizard. Because there's just not that much data and this is so simple of a scenario, we're just going to go ahead and use the wizard, select the table, just the sample table, and we're going to hit finish. So we now see just our sample database there, and this is actually what's in the SQL Server at this point. So after we've connected, we see a few options that become available or highlight. So we have an increasing value. So for example, that we saw that serial number there. Whenever we get to like whenever that increases in value, so as we go from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, every time we notice that, we can execute that record, or we can print that record from that database. We can have a field stamp, so a timestamp, excuse me. So if we have, and that does have to be a date field in your database, but if you have that option enabled or you have that field available, this is where you would select it. You would hit find the last value, and then anytime a newer timestamp is inserted there, the same thing will occur. And this is when a field has a certain value. So if we have a certain type of order number, certain type of product that should print at a particular time. So if we have a serial number, every time the serial number is 3, we need it to print. That's when we would select this. So for example, anytime a bag of chips comes in. If it's that type of chips, then you would want to go ahead and make sure that it prints or it executes. So you can have, and you can have multiple integrations, and this kind of all just adds to the complexity of it. So you can have multiple integrations monitoring the same database, and each one scanning or looking for different types of data or different types of things. So just to set up this example, let's go ahead and set that serial number up to last value equals 3. We're pulling our database, so every 3 seconds we're pulling that SQL Server instance that we have running. And for this type of integration, we notice that it automatically went to for each database record. And that's because it's allowing us to bring in data that's being inserted. So for example, we saw the first name, last name, and the serial numbers. And it's allowing us to use that data as part of our integration, just as if it was a trigger file. And it is literally used the same way to keep things simple as possible. You can use your traditional variable, excuse me. But for this scenario, let's go ahead and use that the data coming in from that database integration. So we'll have the same label, and we don't have all the fields to print, but that's really okay, because at this point, we just want to populate those, the first name, last name, and the serial number. So we'll assign that serial number somewhere. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to bring in that same file, and this time we're going to hit import document settings right away. We're going to populate all our fields. So this one, let's change this to a PDF printer just so that we can all see what that label format looks like. We want to make sure it's correct, right? And then we can scroll down, and then we're going to see the same scenario where you see the name data sources that we have in our, or that we created for our particular text document. Excuse me, text document, disregard that, our particular BarTender document, excuse me. So let's go first name, and let's erase that because we have that in our database. And we're going to do first name. And last name, we also have that. And let's hit last name. And for our barcode, instead of that barcode, let's go ahead and assign the serial number to that barcode. So then we can see that the numbers are actually incrementing. And then the rest can really be left the same. Okay, and let's try to test our integration. Okay, so it looks like it recognized that there was a number 3. And we have our label format that printed there. So let's add a new value into that database there, into that database field, and see if by adding that new value or simulating a ERP system of some sort or another application, inserting a value into that database field, we'll actually see that the labels actually print out. Okay, well, what we can do is, since I'm having trouble updating that, let's go ahead and just start at the beginning of that run. And instead of starting at number 3, let's go ahead and start at number 1 because we do have other values available in that database there. So let's go ahead and start that up, and we should see a few labels print out for us. Okay, so we see we see Fred Smith, Hank Thomas, and Bob Josh number 1 print there. And anytime that that value would be updated there, and that serial number or that number keep going, that's when that would update, and that's when that value would change, or excuse me, when that label would print out based on how we just set this up. So now let's go ahead and also save this one out, and we'll also want to put this into our librarian just to be safe. And this is a okay, that's our database SQL integration there. So we've saved that out, and we're ready to go ahead and deploy that. For this particular one, let's just go ahead and set it to automatic. We'll set it to manual, and then we can start it later, and we'll make sure that we monitor which ones or which database records it prints there. So let's go ahead and deploy our integration just as we had before. And this one can be okay, and okay, and this can also be immediate. We'll go ahead and hit OK. Going back out into our integrations, and we now see multiple BTIN files running there. And then these are actually stored in a special directory. We just take a copy of that BarTender integration file. So we have those two integrations running now. So, and let's see. It looks like we have a couple more questions. So whenever you're ready, Jasper.
Looks like the first question we got here is, what logs or messages are available if the BarTender system database is not installed?
Whenever you're dealing with anything automation or higher, we really do suggest that you install or set up the BarTender system database and configure that. You do have access to some of the service logs, but really all the other logs, such as the print history, the print job information, all that is stored in the BarTender system database. So if you want to keep track of that or you want to have a history of any of those components, then you want to make sure that you do set up your BarTender system database.
Okay. Next one we got here is percent response percent variable data only available as an XML format?
Right, so while the response itself will still be in that format that you were familiar with, you have a little bit more flexibility now. You have all these other variables and you have the ability to create actions to send back responses, such as like saving to a file or sending back over a web request to somewhere else. So you're not just limited to just that. You're able to send back a lot of other information of your integration using the variables. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on there. Thank you, Jasper. For the next section, or what we want to cover next, once our integration builder loads up again here, is that we want to create a web integration or a web service request. So let's go ahead and bring up the user interface again. And as we've been doing all day, we're going to select the web service option, this time instead of file or database. And now, when we talk about web service requests, there are many different types of methods to get the data across and to get that data as part of your, to use the data of the URL or to use the data of the body of the message coming in and to use that as part of your integration and to populate your label to select your printer. So the two methods that we're going to cover today is the get method and the post method. Okay, and you'll learn how to utilize that when with BarTender 2016. Okay, so let's go ahead and since I'm going to create two different ones or two different integration types, I want to name them. And we'll start with get, and that's the first method that we'll use. So we just named that integration, and one thing that we'll want to notice is that this is our URL path name. So this is the path name that we're going to have to execute, or whatever application is sending this web request to BarTender, this is what the information that they're gonna need to know is what URL path and to get the web request across, so to get the label to print. Okay, so for this method, we're actually going to create variables. And the reason is because for this particular method, the variables are part of the URL. And I'll actually copy and paste it into like a text box in a second what that URL actually looks like for the get method so you can see an example. But let's go ahead and create a couple variables that we're going to use to populate data on our label. So let's just do first name and just say it's test. And then we'll add another one that is, and let me scroll down so we can see that better. Another one that is last name. Okay, so then we have our two variables there. And of course, this is a very simple scenario, but it's possible that we have multiples or we have many different variables that we need to populate, such as the printer name or the document to print. But for this example, we're just going to try to get those two across. From there, we're going to go ahead and bring our document in. So we're going to select our integration file, same one that we've been playing with today. And we're going to import our settings. And that's just so that we can get the name data sources in there, the printer or anything else that's going to come in. And we're going to do the exact same thing, and you'll notice a trend with the variables and everything. They're very flexible, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. So you're going to want to find, let's just find that first name, and let's look for that variable that we created. So there we have it, so test. And then we have our last name that we can erase. And then we can set it to last name. And at that point, we really are finished. We want to go ahead and test it now. And we're ready for our application to send a web request via the GET method. So on my other screen, I really just have a kind of like a browser add-on tool, and that I'm using that tool to simulate getting a web request from an application of some sort. So there we see we got Bobby Jackson, and we populated the data from the web request, and we got that into our label format. So now, if you're interested in to see what that URL looks like, let's see if we can bring it in, and we can paste it, and we can make the font a little bit bigger so we can read it all. And there we see that we have my machine name, the integration service, the web service integration get, so what integration we built. And then after that, we have execute, and then we have all the variables here. So then we have the first name and then the last name. And then if we had any more here, we could append them going forward. And use those as variables as well as part of our integration. So that's our get method. So if we go back into our integration builder, let's go ahead and stop that. Let's create a new integration here, also a web service request, but this time, and you'll notice that we're using the ability to have multiple integrations per file here, we're going to use the post method. So the post method differs a little bit because you're actually using the same URL. Well, not the same, it's going to be for this particular integration, but the same structure URL. But the data is actually part of the body. It's not part of the URL itself. So a little bit different method, and also a little bit different method for setting that up. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to set, we want to bring in our create transforms to record set, or bring in our transform text to record set, excuse me. And also our for each database record. And we're going to drag and drop that down into the to execute for each record. So now if you remember, what this is doing is we're connecting to a dummy database, and then we're just using the body of the trigger file as data. And we're doing very much the same thing, just via a web request. So instead of getting a file dropped, we're getting a web request, and in the body of that web request, we're getting all this data. So it may be in a CSV format or a tab delimited format or whatever format that may be. So that we're on the same page though, and we know how to parse that data out and everything and assign it to the correct variables, we'll want to do the same thing where we connect to a dummy database. And for this one, I think we have our own. Okay, so we have our own sample database there for post, and let's look at that file preview. So there we see the available variables that we're going to have that we can assign throughout. And now remember, you're not limited to just these variables. You're able to use any of the integration variables as well as part of your integration process for whatever scenario you need. So there's our sample database there as we see it. So that looks all correct. We want to assign it to our event data so that that sample or any data that comes in the body of that web URL is used as the event data. Let's check for each database record. So that looks correct as well. And then let's bring in our document. And let's do the same thing that we've been doing. Let's import our settings and let's start assigning things out. Okay, so let's change out this printer, and I'm not sure, do we have a, no, we do have one. Nope, excuse me. Our printer name. Now if we scroll down, we have our same name data sources there that we've been messing with. So we have, so it looks like first name, last name, and a text object value. So let's go ahead and populate those. So we're just going to be doing the same thing where we erase the data for the value. We click that red X, and then we hit first name. For last name, we do the same thing where we erase that last name space, click on the X and hit last name. And let's go ahead and also populate the last one, which is the my text object there with text object value. And let's go ahead and see if we can get that to print or not. Okay, and there we see our label that printed out. Let's change the data a little bit. Okay, and we see a different name now. So we see that it's actually working correctly. So we're populating the data from the body of our URL request using that post method, and we're populating our label with it, and it's dynamic, and that's using those variables. So we've created those two integrations there. So and those seem to be working. Luckily, we didn't have any issues just because they're such simple integration. But let's save this out. Let's just call it web. That's fine. We also are saving that in Librarian just so we have everything all organized and in one safe location. And let's deploy our integration. And let's deploy it now. And there we see them. So we can go ahead and close these out, and we can start these integrations. So that one should give us a few print jobs there. And if we start these as well and I send a few requests, we should also get some print jobs. Okay, and it looks like everything is working, right? So now a little bit on this here. So now we see all our integrations that are running here. We can stop each one independently if we need to remove one. So let's say we need to remove this file integration. We simply click that remove button. Now we can stop it and then remove it if needed, if we no longer need it. For the message history, this is real useful as well, I find, is like whenever you're troubleshooting something, it's usually not every single integration that's broken or that's going to be broken. So you can tackle them one at a time to see what's actually going on. And if they are all broken, then you can actually look through them and see what's wrong with each particular integration. In the message history here, they're divided independently in that fashion so that you're easily able to find through them and dig into each one and get all the details from each message. And let's see. Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any other questions, but there was one more small section that I actually wanted to cover before we finish off here. So if you are upgrading to BarTender 2016, or you're not new to BarTender, I should say, and you have an existing setup of some sort, you have Commander probably somewhere. That's usually that's what you use, or that's what we've always used as far as integration goes. So with all this, you may be wondering how hard is it, or what's the whole process for moving forward and migrating from Commander to BarTender 2016's integration builder. Well, the good news is that it's actually very easy. Really, all you would need on your side is you'll need your commander task list, and then and that's actually the .tl file. Um, that's the extension of those file types. And once you have that file, you simply need to import it into Integration Builder. When you first open Integration Builder, you simply hit import commander task list, and from there, if you don't need any other changes and there's nothing else wrong and this was already working, then you're ready to save it out and deploy. So I do have I believe, a simple little example. Just going to go ahead and open up the Integration Builder so that we can kind of see what that looks like. Okay, so instead of creating a new one or opening an integration, and we can actually do that if we need to modify one of our existing ones and then save it out and redeploy it. Instead, we're going to import a commander task list. And I have one here on my desktop, and it's just an older simple one that I had lying around. We're going to go ahead and open that commander task list. Then we get a message that it has imported and converted to the new integration builder. So now something to notice is once you import a task list and you start making changes to it, it's a one-way road. So you're not able to hit File, Save As, and save it as a task list. It's really, once it's a BTIN file, there's no going back to a commander task list. So if we needed any kind of changes, so we're actually monitoring for CSV files, or we're going to use any of the new actions or anything like that, then we can. Otherwise, if this is ready to go already, there's no changes needed, we can save this out, and we can even leave it as commander task list, hit save, and then just hit deploy integration, and it's really that easy. So you open Integration Builder, you hit import, you browse to your task list, and then you select it, and that's really it from there. Once you save it out, it lets you deploy it, and then we'll see it here load up in a second as one of the options in our administration console, that we have the commander task list loaded there. Okay, and if we don't need it for whatever reason, we can just remove it, just like that. So it's really that easy to come forward into the new BarTender 2016 integration builder. So at this point, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. We'll go ahead and wait on the line for a couple minutes. We still have some time left. And other than that, thanks for attending. Okay, and it looks like if you're coming up, so whenever you're ready there, Jasper.
Okay. It looks like the first question we got here, can we add a percent printer name percent to a database that does not have this field?
Yes, you can, and it doesn't technically have to be percent printer name percent. The database field that contains your printer name can be named whatever you would like. And in that scenario, you would just make sure that you select that. So when you're setting up the variable and linking that up, when you're entering the value for the printer, you want to make sure that you select the correct one. That's all. So whatever you have named in your database will work fine.
All right. For version 10.1 or lower, is there any way to use version 2016 to create and modify commander task lists?
You can actually import task lists to BarTender 2016. However, you cannot create task lists from BarTender 2016. So it is a type of one-way street there. So it is something to keep in mind, that once you import that task list and you start using all the new features, you're not able to take that back to previous versions of the software.
All right. Can you specify the bartender document to print as a variable?
Yes, the bartender document, the printers, and anywhere that you see the little blue X as an option, you're able to specify that as a variable. And using the transform record to variable, you're able to populate and use that wherever you want in your integration.
Okay. If embedded PowerShell code is used, can you directly use integration variables in that code?
Yeah, you are able to use variables from throughout your integration in your PowerShell code. All right, so that seems like that's all the questions. Thank you, Jasper. Well, everyone, thank you very much for attending.